During last week's episode of Grid Tonight, we expressed positive thoughts and optimism about Katherine Legge's NASCAR Cup Series debut at Phoenix Raceway and the significance of becoming the first female driver to compete at NASCAR's premier level since 2018. However, Legge's performance in her debut didn't exactly go as planned, which has led to lots of criticism. To her credit, compared to where she was in practice, she picked up the pace in qualifying despite starting in last place. Now, on lap 4, Legge brought out an early race caution after spinning on her own, but luckily there wasn't any damage to the car, so she kept going. However, later in the race, she was getting lapped again by the leaders and tried to stay on the inside lane throughout turn 2, but ended up travelling up the track into Josh Berry and spun the number 78 Live Fast Motorsport Chevrolet. Daniel Suarez had nowhere to go and crashed into Legge, ruining a strong day for the Trackhouse Racing driver, who was running inside the top 10 at the time of the accident. In an interview with Bob Popcraft from Fox Sports, Legge called her debut baptism of fire, but felt like there was positives to take away since she's learned a lot despite making mistakes and hope to do more Cup Series races in the future. After the race, Suarez voiced his opinion on his post-race vlog, saying he has nothing against Legge. He hopes female drivers can get into the sport, emphasizing that she wasn't the problem. He felt the problem was NASCAR for allowing somebody with no stock car racing experience to compete in the Cup Series. Also, on Kevin Harvick's Happy Hour podcast, he said Legge was thrown to the wolves because she was in the worst car, in a Cup car that she's never driven before, with limited NASCAR experience, and he understands the importance of bringing in drivers from different series. But Harvick thinks NASCAR needs to return to a level of accountability by making sure drivers who get approved are properly prepared to compete in the Cup Series. Then he brought up the example of Helio Castroneves crashing in his dual race, specifically the second hit when the four-time Indianapolis 500 champion floored it and crashed again due to his unfamiliarity with the Cup car. Harvick added that he felt that NASCAR made the right decision not to improve Mike Wallace to compete in the Daytona 500, given his lack of recent experience in a Cup car. His co-host, Caitlin Vince, said that NASCAR needs to be putting drivers in the best position to succeed. Photo taken by Chris Grantham from Getty Images. Matt and Tannen's back with us for this one as well. Here he is. Do you think the criticism of Katherine Legge's debut in the NASCAR Cup Series is fair game? And do you think that NASCAR needs to be stricter with its approval process?
Well, what was the line I used last week about NASCAR's rulebook being the greyest of grey? And yet again, we have to talk about something that we really shouldn't be having to talk about. Not the fault of Kat, let's just say. I thought she did the best job she probably could have done in the circumstances, as you mentioned, Josh, and it was mentioned. It's the worst, the worst equipment out there. I mean, she had that early spin. That's a rookie error, coldish tires, trying to build up her pace at the beginning of the race, trying to run around at the back. And it was just a case of just log laps. And that's what they did after that. They were a few laps down, cracking through it. And myself and Matthew Owens were doing the race on USRN on Mixler.com. They cut to the shot of Katherine live there. And I said, and now we're looking at Katherine Legge. She's done, after that early spin, she's done a great job. And then all of a sudden she was sideways in turn 2.
Hang on.
And being run into by Daniel. So it was a proper curse of the commentary moment.
You did it too. I did exactly the same
must
thing.
have done exactly the same thing. My thoughts instantly went to Toby Moody after Marco Simoncelli crashed at Jerez that time in the lead.
Yeah.
What have I said? What have I done? Yeah. But I don't know. Tanya's probably got more thoughts on this than I think she did as good a job as she could have done. I don't think the criticism should be pointed at her as more the approval process and the rules and everything else.
I definitely agree with Matt that the criticism around everything that has happened in this situation should not be centered around Katherine Legge. Katherine Legge has been a stalwart in motorsports for the past 20 years. She has done IndyCar. She has done IMSA. She has done sports cars, Formula E. She has done it all. including the NASCAR Xfinity Series, where at Road America in 2018, she got a top 15 in a JD Motorsports entry. I don't need to explain to our viewers how impressive that is in a car that she'd hardly ever driven. Now, one thing I will say, and it's important to point out, earlier this season on the CW broadcast for the Xfinity Series, they were talking about Harrison Burton, and he mentioned how much more difficult the Xfinity car is to drive compared to when he last drove one, which was at the end of the 2021 season. So, we're talking about Katherine Legge having last driven a stock car somewhat regularly back in 2018. So imagine how much the car has changed in 7 years. And then you're going up to the Cup Series, which is a completely different platform from what your frame of knowledge is when it comes to stock car racing. And you combine all of that, and you only give her, I think they had a 45-minute practice prior to the qualifying this weekend because of the option tire being introduced into the Phoenix race weekend for Cup. And I still don't feel like 40 minutes plus 2 qualifying laps is really enough time for anybody on earth to get up to speed in a Cup Series car, especially when she only got like the week before and the week of in the simulator to test everything out. Again, I don't want to put any of this on Katherine Legge because I don't think it's relevant to the conversation where her credentials are. She is an amazing driver and she is fit to be in the Cup Series, but the problem comes down to amount of time in the car. And I feel like when NASCAR has a driver making their first start, they should at least grant them, like, I don't know, an additional 15, 20 minutes of practice time just so they can get their legs under them. We don't want to see these new drivers getting into the car and wrecking. I'm sure Katherine and BJ McLeod didn't want that to happen coming into this weekend. I'm sure NASCAR didn't want that to happen coming into this weekend. And yet, we don't do anything to help prevent it. So I don't know, like the whole conversation around this, I feel like the most level-headed about it has been Kevin Harvick. He had pretty much the same thing to say about this that I did, in that, you know, she just needed more seat time. And I'm just getting frustrated because, as Matt so eloquently pointed out, NASCAR's rulebook is just written in shades of gray. And I just feel like it's something we have to keep talking about every single week, is the officiating in the Cup Series. And frankly, I know that I've been on 3 or 4 different shows this past week having to talk about it, and it's getting annoying. I'm sure people in our audience are tired of hearing me come on here and talk about it, but it wouldn't be a problem if we just had more definitive ways to get drivers prepared for these races and to make sure that they're completely up to speed. Personally, I would have really liked to have seen her tackle an Xfinity car the day before just to double check, because obviously she did ARCA this year at Daytona, but she was out of the race in 4 laps. Not her doing, obviously. It's ARCA, unfortunately. And, you know, with that said, Daytona is a completely different track that requires a completely different skill set compared to Phoenix. So, yeah, I definitely think that it would have behooved her to have a little bit more experience, but I also think it would have behooved NASCAR and the entire Cup field had there been more practice for her or more opportunities for her to get behind the wheel and test some laps out to see what she can find in this car. Because let's face it, the 78 car, it's an open car now, so it's not making the same money that it used to when it had a charter, when Live Fast was running the full season. It also isn't going to like perform at the same pace that, say, even Cody Ware's car is supposed to run. But I'm even looking back at some of the tweets from that day, and I noticed something from Jonathan Field, one of our esteemed colleagues here, on on the second channel, she was apparently running down Brad Keselowski, a Cup champion, in the 78 car. The girl had speed. Like
she was fast, really
yeah,
fast.
She clearly had speed. Like, it's not like she wasn't good. It's not like she isn't capable in this car. It's just what happened in turn 2 in the third stage was just a really unfortunate moment that we see happen all the time with rookie drivers. I remember JJ Yaley absolutely cleaning Mark Martin out when he was trying to come on pit road in his rookie season in the Cup Series back in 2006, and then Mark Martin raked him over the coals for it. This is something that happens with rookies all the time coming into the Cup Series, but because Shane Van Gisbergen comes in and wins his very first race in the series, people's entire frame of reference has been completely thrown off. So yeah, I don't know. I'm getting really annoyed with the conversation around this because I feel like too much of it is blaming it on Katherine Legge, and not enough of it is being pointed at the people upstairs that make the decisions like this and have the ability to make concessions when they're necessary. And instead, we're just writing weird terms into the charter agreement to get a 41st car into the race.
Oh, I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah. So I guess that's where I stand on this. We need more practice time for young or inexperienced drivers to really get their feet underneath them in this car.
2 words: Quinn Houff.
I didn't want to go there, but yes.
Those that remember.
I'm glad you brought up the 41, by the way, because Bob Podcast 2 hours ago has tweeted, NASCAR has changed the open exemption provisional to where if it is granted, there will be 41 cars in the field, no more if that driver qualifies, then there's 40, but if the driver doesn't qualify, then there's 41. So the Helio Castroneves provisional that was at Daytona is now a set precedent going forward. Yeah. Not sure how I feel about that. Didn't really go down well either anywhere else.
I don't think we'll see it again until a certain S. Perez decides he wants to do the Cup race at Mexico City in June. I wouldn't worry about it until then.
Yeah, we've got time to wait, haven't we? The initial game plan, of course, for Katherine Legge was to make a Cup Series debut at the Circuit of the Americas, but the team wasn't able to get the car ready in time. Now, given Legge's extensive background on road courses, Koto would have been a natural place for her Premier Start debut. But for Phoenix, Legge's only, oval starts in stock cars was an Xfinity Series race at Richmond back in 2018. And, of course, the ARCA season opener last month at Daytona. So, Tanner, coming back to you before we let you go on this one. If Legge wants to run another Cup Series race on an oval in the future, should she be required to run an Xfinity, trucks or ARCA first to gain more experience before being allowed to try ovals at the top level again? It's kind of what you were touching on a moment ago.
Yeah, I guess I'll just expand upon it a little bit more. I think ideally I would like to see her get into more stock cars or stock trucks and, make a couple more starts at some of these oval facilities. But again, she was making ground on a former champion of the sport at an oval where she hadn't raced in, I would assume, many years or ever. And I find that very impressive for, again, somebody that had never been in this style of car before. Now, one thing that stood out to me, and I mentioned this in last week's pre-race show when we were discussing Legge getting into the Cup car, Kyle Larson came out of Indianapolis last year and mentioned that the current Cup Series platform, the next-gen car, handles very, very similarly to a much slower version of an Indy car. So given that Katherine comes from an IndyCar background and more of an open wheel background, it's really not surprising that she was able to find speed on a track where it does somewhat profile similarly to like Iowa or like a Richmond where, again, she's raced before. That said, again, I think it would behoove her and would help her learn how to like finish one of these races out and like, you know, kind of like learn how to like stay out of the way a little bit better, because I mean, I would like to hope that she could get a better ride next time, but they're not exactly plentiful in the Cup Series right now, the good rides that don't have a charter. So I would like to see her get a little bit more experience next time, but I don't think it is necessary. I just think that it would probably help in terms of her finishing out the next race on an oval if she were to have a little bit more experience, a little bit more recent experience behind the wheel. And I have a feeling this isn't the last we'll see of Katherine Legge in NASCAR, and personally, I really hope it isn't. So I definitely think that a little bit more experience next time would definitely help, but I don't think it's necessary.
Just checking the old stats while you were talking, Tony. I was quite surprisingly that there isn't an IndyCar start for Kat at Phoenix. I thought there might have just been one somewhere along the line, but turns out not. So that was quite surprising. So you can add that to the list. New track, new car, new series, 2 different types of tyre to learn this weekend, of course, to throw into the mix as well. So backwards against the wall, some would say. Do they need to do something about this? Probably, to stop this or something similar happening again. Some kind of super licensee kind of thing. You have to have done a number of starts in the series to move up with a decent average finish or running position number or driver rating, however they calculate that, or something along those lines. But then you wouldn't have the Helio Castroneves wanting to come and play, or Juan Pablo Montoya coming back last year to do the race at Watkins Glen, Kobayashi's, Jenson Buttons, Ricky Taylor's, Shane Van Gisberger's of this world. So there's both hands, much like NASCAR's rulebook, 2 things fighting against each other at the moment. You can't have it all. You can't have your cake and eat it too, let's say.